I'd like to call to order the City Council meeting of Thursday, August 2nd. Please rise for an invocation by Councilman Derek Slaughter, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord, we thank you for bringing us together yet again tonight. We pray that you guide our thoughts and allow us to make the best decisions on behalf of the citizens and the taxpayers, Lord. We pray that you watch over those in harm's way, both here and abroad, who protect the freedoms we enjoy every day. And Lord, we just thank you for everything. We ask all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Next item on the agenda is approval of City Council meeting minutes dated July 19th, 2018. Can I have a motion and a second to approve those minutes?
So move.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion to approve.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and those minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no request for that this evening, so we'll move on to the next item, which is a presentation by Penn Strategies, and the president of Penn Strategies, Mr. Jason Fitzgerald. Just trying to fill a little time for you there. How are you this evening?
Thank you, Dr. President, Mr. Vice President, members of council, members of the administration. Thank you for the opportunity to present our second quarterly report of the year. I provided all of the members of council and the administration, and would have copies for the public if they wanted one, an update. The first page is a memo that's outlining the primary priorities that we're working on. I'm just going to very briefly go down through that, and then and this is a rare instance where you have a brief meeting today, so I'll do my best to keep my comments brief, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Relative to the levy, our team obviously has attended numerous meetings with local, state, and federal officials related to the levy and also related to the SWIFT process. I do on a monthly basis provide reports to council, which will specifically tell you, who we were meeting with, and be happy to at any time, expand upon the topics that are listed there. We are continuing our advocacy efforts on behalf of the RCAP grant application that the city authorized the county to submit on their behalf. Obviously continuing to work with managing the very important relationships between the city of Williamsport, Loyalsock Township, Old Lycoming Township, South Williamsport Borough, and the county, as obviously all of those municipalities are affected by this, and we need their assistance with advocacy efforts. Our team is also regularly keeping updated on the progress in Washington through talking to the lobbyists that are hired, and also I try to speak with Congressman Marino on at least a bi-weekly basis to update him on what we're doing, and also get updates from him on what he's doing on our behalf, and he's been very helpful in this process, and we certainly appreciate that. The plan at this point relative to funding is to sort of piecemeal the project so that we can target the things that are most important to get them funded, and then move to the next stage. The first step in the first items that we need to work on are what are referred to as the relief wells. And the relief wells can be repaired or reconstructed, whatever the appropriate construction term is, for about $2.25 million. So at this point, and there's hopefully going to be an announcement over the next couple of weeks on our RCAP grant application. What we've done at the request of Senator Yaw and Governor Wolf's office, our original request was for $5 million. That's what our total line item is. And we'd like to, obviously, if necessary, go back to the pot and pursue additional fundings on that line item. But really what we're pushing for at this point is to get the state to cover half, which would be the maximum that we could get from RCAP. So that would be 1.125 million. So we expect an announcement on that application very soon. We're cautiously optimistic. If we are able to do that, the county has given every indication that they would come up with the funding to match that. And then we would move on to the second priority. So, you know, again, trying to take care of these items one at a time is very important. And it will also help us with our SWIFT plan and then ultimately to secure additional funding from the federal government. So this first phase, because it takes a little bit longer to access dollars at the federal level, would be funded ideally by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Lycoming County. On the Graphius Run project, our team has researched similar projects throughout the Commonwealth. And what we identified was on a number of occasions, the Department of Environmental Protection has provided funding essentially in its entirety for these kinds of things in the past. They need to be in the capital budget in order to be funded, and there is a process which I've outlined in the attached memo that you should all have in front of you here, if we could just take a second and look at that. Basic overview is Pennsylvania has one of the most extensive flood protection programs in the entire country because we have a lot of waterways. The Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, is authorized to provide structural flood protection in any area of the Commonwealth that requests such protection, if it can be economically justified. We're trying to get them to extend this to the levee. That would be very nice, but so far we have been unable to find any instances where they have fully funded reconstruction of levees that were originally put in by the federal government. So if we didn't have a levee there, they would consider funding for it, but since there's a structure there, it makes it tougher. There are many conditions that have to be analyzed before determining the feasibility of providing flood protection. So in other words, DEP is not going to just come in, study the situation and say, okay, we'll throw $5 million or whatever at it. There's got to be a cost-benefit analysis done. They don't provide grant funding to the municipality. They take the project over, which I believe has a lot of benefits because we've got our hands full with plenty of other things right now. So I've tried to lay this out in steps. So step one, which is really where we're at, and Councilwoman Katz, as chairwoman of the Public Works Committee, has been very heavily involved in this and was actually in a meeting with Doug Hill, who's the project director from the Department of Environmental Protection that this would fall under. The City of Williamsport and Loyalsock Township would have to pass a study resolution of sponsorship, and that would be the formal request for Department of Environmental Protection assistance. Following this request, a project engineer would be assigned from the department to begin calculations pertaining to hydrology of the local area. I don't really know the details of that, but engineers would. If this is approved by the DEP, which we're confident that it would be, a feasibility study would begin. All of that work would be done by the Department of Environmental Protection. They would either do it with their internal engineers or they would contract engineers, engineering firms to do it if they felt that could be done in a more cost-effective way. And I lay out there, you know, everything that they're going to be looking at. Obviously, the preliminary project design. The biggest part of that where we have to work and where we'll need everybody's help, including the public, is the economic justification. So moving on to step two. After the study report is issued, engineers from the Department of Environmental Protection will meet again with the city and with the township to explain the project in detail and also talk about what the local responsibilities would be. When we're referring to sponsorship, we're not talking about necessarily dollars, although dollars could be involved in doing these things. You'll see we have 5 things listed there. So in other words, so the way that it would work out from a logistical standpoint, they would do the study. They would come up with a cost. Let's just say that the cost is a similar project in the borough of Ashley, and I hate to throw out numbers, but just for the purposes of calculation, was $5 million, okay? That was a project that only impacted 4 properties. This project impacts 269, am I right, Chelsea? 269 properties. So we have a very, very strong case, I think. The local sponsorship, we would have to agree to provide all the right-of-ways and easements. So in other words, we would have to, the city and the township, negotiate with property owners the right to go onto their property. There are 4 properties involved in this. We believe, based upon preliminary estimates, that the total cost to purchase those easements would be under $500,000. So, but let's just take that off to the side once, but let's look at that as a possible city/township financial responsibility, but I do have a plan on how we could take care of that later. You would have to sign an agreement holding the Commonwealth free of liability for any damages resulting from the project. So, Mr. White, there would be a lot of work that our legal counsels would have to do. You would have to work with their solicitor, obviously, to make sure that it didn't put the city of Williamsport in any kind of unnecessary jeopardy. I'm not an attorney, so that would be something that we would need our solicitors to take a strong look at. We would also have to agree to maintain and operate the completed project, similar to what we did with the levee. So in other words, they'll come in and build the system for you, but you have to agree to maintain it. They're not going to provide you regular funding to maintain the project. So essentially what you're agreeing to do is maintain it over the course of eternity. The other thing is we would have to relocate or remove any buildings and utility which would interfere with the construction of the project. I don't think we have any concerns related to that. I don't believe that there are any water lines or buildings that would have to be removed, so that's good. And that's what the local responsibilities are. So essentially, DEP wants to come in and do the project and then turn it over to us. They would come back on an annual basis for inspections to make sure that we were doing what we said we would do. After the city of Williamsport and/or Loyalsock Township adopted a resolution of sponsorship, which is the second phase. In other words, all the analysis has been done, and we say, okay, we will do this. The Department of Environmental Protection will request from the governor in its capital budget program the funding for it to be done. It's the capital budget's run on a 2-year cycle with 5-year requests. So obviously our advocacy efforts would have to come into play, and Senator Yall's advocacy efforts would have to come into play in getting us front-loaded on that. As I said, 269 properties being affected would very, very much be on the high end of these projects. So I think we could make a compelling argument to move this up. The project will, at that point, proceed to final design following the authorization after the legislature passes the capital budget, which would occur next year, and the governor signs it. It would go into final design, which is essentially where they come in with a little bit more detailed costs. When the design is completed and all the land has been acquired, the project would be advertised for construction and awarded to the lowest qualified bidder by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, because it's a DEP project. The city won't have to deal with that, nor will they be responsible for selecting the construction company that will do the project. After it's completed, an operation and maintenance manual will be provided. The city and/or Loyalsock Township will then be responsible for providing on an annual basis the funds required to maintain the system. So let's get into the economic justification part. So all this sounds great. It sounds like we've just found a solution, which I think we actually have. The economic justification portion, we have to determine that over the next 10 years, there will be equal or more loss than there would be investment in doing the project. So in order to do that, we would have to look to the last 10 years of loss information, which the city's provided us with. It looks like it's a pretty high number. And then we have to survey the residents. So when you hear about us surveying the residents, the reason we're doing that is some of these costs may not have been captured. You know, somebody that had to pay for a new water heater, new washer, new dryer. A woman that I met with last week has probably since 1970, 3 washing machines, several water heaters, and she actually gets backed up sewage into her basement. So all of these things go down to the Department of Environmental Protection. They will do an economic analysis, and they will determine, okay, there's going to be an estimate of $10 million in damage. Again, I'm just throwing these numbers around. $10 million in damages over the next 10 years. The project costs $5 million. We'll do it. If it's $1 less than what it's going to cost to do it, they won't, because the economic justification is not there. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions that any members of council have at this point. Councilman Williams.
And thank you for the detailed explanation, especially on that part. I mean, I know you've been meeting with Public Works on both of these really important, significant projects, and all of council has been engaged with you and the county and all of the stakeholders on the levee project, including a meeting today that.
And we appreciate that. I didn't mean to not recognize the others who were.
Oh, no. I'm just saying there a lot of good information on the levee side. I personally feel well informed because we've all been working on it, all hands on deck. It's such a big project. On the Graphius Run, while council initiated looking for a long-term solution a couple years ago, and it's been slowly building momentum, we finally have that momentum, I think, now. And rightly, Public Works has been the liaison that our city planner, Ms. Myers, and you and others have been engaging with to keep council informed. And so, and we have, but not at the level of detail that you just explained, and that's a good thing, to now have that knowledge. The question, my first question really is just timeline. When, on August 30th, can we pass a study resolution of sponsorship?
Yes, and I would like, respectfully would request that the city council, and I have also respectfully requested, much more respectfully requested to you than Loyalsock Township, of course, but that they consider passing that resolution as soon as possible. Now.
And has Loyalsock responded well to that?
Yes. We have a meeting with Mr. Burdette. Actually, I have to work out we're going to start with Public Works and the administration and then go to the full body. I actually owe Mrs. Katz a couple of dates that I did. I've already gotten the dates, in other words, from Loyalsock Township. I just have to share them with the city. And they're very interested if it doesn't cost them any money, which this doesn't. Although there are, some details that we need to cover. But yes, I would like to see that resolution passed as soon as possible. And then as far as the timeline, the work that Ms. Myers and the folks from the Streets and Parks Department and I'm going to do relative to surveying and collecting information, I would like to have all of that to DEP by the end of September or early October. Even though the capital budget won't be run until next year because it's only one every session, I'd like to get that information to Senator Yall as soon as possible because he will get lots of requests for these things. And we obviously would like to get assurances that it's in. So the sooner we start this, the better. So let's say, for example, it is passed in the capital budget next year. And hopefully, now this year the budget passed on time. The last non-election year, the capital budget wasn't approved until October. Let's say they do everything on time. It gets approved in June. We would try to get as early into that 2-year cycle as possible, so potentially construction could start. What do you think? I mean, I'm not an engineer. If the funding were released in 2020, 2021, however long it would take for construction and engineering to. So it's not going to be next year. This project's not starting next year. There's no way.
And that's, I mean, that's as
3
clear.
years maybe would be my guess.
And that's as clear a timeline as I would expect us to be able to come up with. The key is, I think, 2 points that I wanted to make as a follow-up to that question. One, the faster we get step 1 done, or the next step done, the faster that starts. And so I encourage you to bring it to us. And if there's anything we can do to explain how important this is to others, including the township supervisors, please let us know. But the momentum that we have now, the faster we can keep it moving and get it rolling, the more quickly the citizens that live and suffer from a decades-old problem can find relief. And we're not talking about 100-year or 500-year floods that cause problems to that community. I feel personally terrible that it's taken us 2 years to be able to get to this point, but that's just we set everybody to that task a couple of years ago. They've been dealing it with much longer, and it's a much bigger deal to the 269 properties that you were just talking about. So I encourage all deliberate speed and faster, because they're under the gun at every rainstorm.
I know when they go to sell their houses, they have the problem of, having to explain how frequently this situation occurs. You also have mold issues, which, in many instances, my guess is we're going to find that some people, whether or not their insurance covered it, but have probably had to put $20,000 or $30,000 into their basements because of mold issues. So that's a major long-term health concern. So,
right.
And it's a lot of people that are affected and impacted. And I will say from the few people we haven't had a chance to, I'm looking forward to getting some exercise and knocking on some doors, but the few people that we've spoken to, they feel at least now that the city's listening, whereas, there was one woman who's been trying this since 1970, and, she said that the responses, in those days were not very good, and then in the 90s they weren't very good. They feel at least that they're being listened to now, and I know that everybody in this room and everybody on council is very committed to fixing this very real problem that impacts a lot of our neighbors.
And it makes me happy that they feel listened to.
I
But
think
that's
they do.
almost unimportant to the actual solving of the problem, relative to the
Right.
actual solving of the problem. And so let's keep that going so we can actually get
If we don't move quickly, I think that their patience will.
good. And
will quickly disappear.
As they should. As they should. So let me open it up for comments and questions. Mrs. Katz.
The one thing that we have to understand is this survey is vitally important because it gives us the solid foundation. How much money has incurred in the last 10 years. And the DEP has been very wonderful with their survey. This is not something that the survey that we make up. They actually have a survey that they provide. So for Chelsea and to Jason to go through the community, and this is a widespread, I mean, we just think it's in one area. No, this goes through how many areas of the city at this point. This past storm that we had, we've paid $11,000 in overtime. I mean, that's horrendous with just one storm. And that's part of what we can put into our process here as far as what this is costing everybody. So I'm hoping that the citizens, I'm not hoping, I know they'll be very helpful in filling out these forms. And I think we're all going to be amazed at how much this has cost the citizens over the last 10 years. And to go back through streets and parks, to go how much it's cost them to deal with this problem. So that to me is the one major step that we have to go after immediately, because it's going to be a lot of footwork. It really is.
And could I say too, very briefly, this is different than any process that's happened before. So my concern is that we'll knock on people's doors and they'll say, you're from the city, you're not going to do anything about it. You haven't done anything for 50 years. Mm-hmm. This is different now. So we need people to know that this is we've identified a path to fixing the problem, and we need them to answer their doors, especially for Chelsea, right? They'll probably slam the door on me, but maybe for her they'll open the door.
One thing that I would like to mention too that's partially in the works right now, since there are a lot of homes and businesses and a couple of industries that are affected by this, we are planning to hold a public meeting late next week or early the following week, just to try to bring the people in to fill out these very quick surveys. It should only take at most 5 to 10 minutes for people to come in, visit us. We still have to pin down the location yet, but that's already in the works. Just waiting on a confirmation of a date and time and location. But for the community to come, and we're going right to your community, so we're trying to find a spot within the community for you to come and visit us. It'd be really great for that 5-10 minute survey for you to fill out there, and then the ones who cannot fill it out at the location, you can always email us or even phone us for a quick interview over the phone to fill out the survey questions as well.
If somebody authorizes us to do it, we'll draft a resolution and get it to Mrs. Frank. If the mayor was here, I would ask him to authorize me to do it, but that.
For the August 30th meeting,
for the August 30th meeting.
The study resolution of sponsorship?
Yes.
I authorize you to do it.
Thank you. Okay. Then it'll be done. We'll get it to Mrs. Frank.
Mrs. Katz, were you finished?
I think that's finished. Just make sure the press gets this out, that the survey is vitally important for our funding, okay?
Mr. Allison.
As far as getting the people in that area, I'd be glad to, since I live in that area, and know the level of frustration there. We moved there in '86, and shortly thereafter, there was a huge, it's when it really all first erupted, since I knew of the problems in that area. And there have been several instances after that, and it's gotten more frequent. Maybe it's because there's more severe storm activity. Regardless, I know a few years ago, maybe it was 4 or 5, there was one of those storms where there was widespread affection in that area. And people were promised that things were going to be done, and it didn't happen. So there is that, but I'd be glad to be a liaison in any way and
Thank you,
rally the troops and, you know, to let everyone know it's different this time.
And one of the things, DEP this last budget year had $50 million in additional funding that Governor Wolf put in, and so I mean, what you said is actually scientifically accurate. There are, for whatever reasons, you know, global warming or whatever, there are more instances of heavy levels of rain, and therefore more flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments or questions? Hearing none, thank you for your presentation and helping the city move forward on these two vitally important projects. Next item on the agenda is certificate of appropriateness for 150 West Church Street. Can I have a motion to remove this from the table? I hear a motion and a second. Mrs. Frank on the motion to remove from table.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson? Yes. Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the item is back up for discussion. Mr. Girardi? I'll
Yes.
give you the floor. How are you this evening?
Good. Yourself?
Good.
Good. How's everybody else? Good? Doing well? Good. What you have before you, if you remember last meeting, there was some discussion on this particular building, and you requested the owner to go back through and do a revision to the building. What I did was, just to give you an idea, this was what originally was built years ago, okay? This is the Church Street, okay, which is actually the north elevation. And then this is the side of William Street, which is actually the west elevation. This is rear traffic building. I also gave everybody a little handout right here. This is actually what the north elevation looks like right now, okay, which is from actually 3rd Street, okay, this picture. And then what I also gave you then was the actual drawing rendering that they changed, which you have before you, okay? This is a little bit fading, so this color and the color you have on your sheet is the same color, okay? It's just this hung on my wall for probably about 4 years, and the sun hits it, so it fades it out a little bit. But the yellow you see, the color that you see on this is what the building looks like, color-wise. What they did was they did go back through. The interior of the building design and layout remains the same. The windows face outside. Those are the actual units. What they did was, though, they took the door that exited out to the side of the building, removed it, put the door with the window in front, which is on 3rd Street. And I keep saying front, but it's actually the north elevation. It's the easiest way to explain it.
Sure.
Okay?
Right.
It is all one building. It's attached.
Right.
Okay? They also put a little canopy above it, and they also have the Residence Inn by Marriott sign above it. They have some wall sconces up. They have some decorative brick piers that go up alongside, which actually protrude out from the building. They're not separate piers, but they actually bump out from the actual wall of the building. And with that, they did change the color a little bit as far as the brick. They have a larger front entrance, which before it was all one color. Now it's a brick face that goes all the way up through the center. Okay? And we do have a representative here if you'd like to ask her any questions, or myself at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Girardi. Let me just start by expressing my appreciation to Chartwell and the organization, and Ms. Losi in particular, for being willing to listen to our concerns and respond to them. I mean, there's two strategies from your perspective that you could do, push back or respond, and you chose to respond, and I think that collaborative relationship is definitely one that we all need to replicate and model, whether it's at the local or the national level, maybe even at the international level. I think this goes a long way to address our concerns. Of course, I need to listen to my colleagues, but clearly, I personally find this a more attractive opportunity for pedestrians to walk by and know that this is a place of business. It's not the backside of something. Whether or not they can go into that door is really a business issue, but it clearly, you don't wonder what it is, you don't know where you get in. And you know, the issue of customers making it easy for them to engage with the rest of the downtown is also enhanced, I think, by this option. So I appreciate the efforts, and I think it goes a long way to meeting our concerns. So let me open it up to questions from my colleagues. Ms. Mealy.
I would second that. I think this is a sort of an excellent redistribution of the door that addresses all of our concerns and seems to do it simply without affecting a lot of the other design on the structure. My only questions are about the side view. It looks as though we will have an emergency exit door then it's still on the side of the structure.
No. That door you see there is down further.
Yeah.
It's where the connection is.
So,
Okay,
yeah, so it's no longer in, so.
It's in the
emergency
existing
exit door
building.
is that door you're
And
looking
is
at.
this, and this
Oh, no.
rendering of the structure now goes out to street level? It takes that 4
This rendering of the
feet?
structure won't go, it will go out to, if you were to stand on the corner of Williams and Third and look down the street,
Mm-hmm.
the building's all set back about 2 feet or so, because that's the property line. They can't intrude any further than that, okay? And what everybody has done on that side is they extended their sidewalk to the building,
Right.
okay? Now, I don't know if they're going to be doing any planning or anything at that point in that area. You're gonna still gonna extend
Yeah, and that's the one thing we wanted to talk about, and I know.
If you could, for the
Yes.
record there. Jennifer
last
Losey,
week-
Chartwell Hotels, I'm just putting it on the recording for you.
Oh, sure. It's Jennifer Losey, CEO of Chartwell Hotels. So 2 weeks ago, when we had this discussion, it was to bring the building out to the sidewalk. But we are, as our architect confirmed, we're matching all the other buildings. So there will still be that 2 foot or 4 foot area, which will be plantings. And we're actually, because of the sidewalk being there and the windows to the guest rooms being right on the sidewalk, it does benefit us just to have it back slightly. And there, we may just put a small, like a 3 foot fence, like a wrought iron fence up, just to give it that separation on the window area. And then the door will be accessible, obviously.
Right. Great. And then obviously some sort of landscaping or something like that, which might help give your guests a little bit of privacy too.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. I didn't think about that when we were talking about it, but the architect reminded us. And then to answer your question about the secondary door, the second door, there will not be one in the area that was on the
Right.
original plans 2 weeks ago, but behind the building, there is still another exit.
An emergency
from,
exit of sorts.
Yeah, that
Right.
you can still get out, so there will be the 2 exits.
Yeah, okay. No, that sounds great. Okay, so it is still the same dimensions as what we saw last week. Got it. Okay, well, thank you very much. It looks beautiful, and we do appreciate Chartwell's willingness to work with us on the design element.
No, it was a great suggestion, and we were happy to make the change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? One last one, just to round out the discussion. It's neither moving to the north or expanding to the north at the sidewalk. The western property line is also staying the 10-foot fire gap, or whatever you call it.
Mr. Alberts and I sat down, there's certain things, building code-wise, that has to be maintained.
Sure.
Certain types of construction on the walls, because we're getting closer to other buildings, so there has to be certain fire ratings and so forth. So yes, they're still gonna have that 10-foot maintained between the 2 buildings.
Okay, just since we talked about one dimension, I wanted to talk about the other one, so I figured that was the case. If there are no other comments or questions from members of council, Mrs. Frank, on the certificate of appropriateness.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter.
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Dr. Williamson.
Yes, and that certificate is approved. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is accept for filing. We have the public safety minutes of May the 22nd, 2018, and the Historic Preservation Committee meeting minutes of June the 5th, 2018. Can I have a motion and a second to approve those for filing?
Second.
Hear a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank.
Ms. Mealy.
Yes.
Mr. Noviello.
Yes.
Mr. Henderson.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter.
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Dr. Williamson.
Yes, and those are accepted for filing. Next item is announcements. There will be a police pension board immediately following the city council meeting this evening. There will also immediately following that be an executive session of council for the purpose of negotiation. The next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be held on Thursday, August 30th at 7:30 p.m. here in council chambers. Other upcoming meetings include Monday, August 6th at noon, Planning Commission, at 5:30 p.m., Government Study Commission, on Tuesday, August 7th at 11 a.m., Historic Preservation, and at 3:30 p.m., ERC Committee. Monday, August 13th at 4 p.m. is Recreation. Thursday, August 16th at 10:30 a.m. is Zoning Hearing Board, and at 4 p.m. is Board of Health. Monday, August 20th at 12 noon is Planning Commission, at 5:30 p.m. is Government Study Commission. Tuesday, August 21st at 10 a.m. is the Board of Health, 3:30 p.m. is ERC, and at 6:30 is HARB. Wednesday, August 22nd at 11:30 a.m. is the Redevelopment Authority. Monday, August 27th at 4 p.m. is Recreation Commission, 5:30 p.m. is Government Study Commission, and Tuesday, August 28th at 1 p.m. is the Finance Committee, 2:30 is the Public Works Committee, and 3:30 is the Public Safety Committee. Note in all of that, that's a long list of committee meetings. It's partially because there is, and really my note to everyone is, don't show up 2 weeks from now. Because as we've done for the last number of years, we take an August recess, which is the fancy Washington, D.C. version of it. Around here, we just call it a break for Little League, so we can enjoy some real Americana here in the next few weeks. That brings us to the end of our agenda already, and so I want to open it up in a second for comments from council and then others, but I want to start by asking, I was going to ask the mayor this, but he's not here. The director of administration would be the next person I would ask. He's not here, so I think I'll ask the director of finance, Mr. Pavlak, about this. A couple weeks ago, there was what scheduled to be a meeting that was sort of the last step before sending out an RFP for the to shop around for an insurance broker, and that was to be rescheduled. As I understand it, did that meeting get rescheduled yet?
Not to my knowledge. I've been out for the past few days, so I haven't had a chance to touch base with the mayor to find out his...
Okay, and probably your answer will be the same, but let me ask you, at the time the mayor said something about wanting to have language inserted about lowest cost, I think is what he said in the paper. Has he provided that language to be inserted?
I haven't seen him since.
And of course, it has not appeared on the finance agenda, I'm assuming.
Nor have I heard from from Jill Nagy, our insurance consultant, that it's been provided to her. Not that's not definitive, but.
And when do we need to, given the deadlines that are in the existing draft of the RFP, and given the time frame that we have through the end of the year and the end of our current agreements on insurance, when do we need to, what's our drop dead date for sending out the RFP, if you know, and you might not, so that we can get this done in 2018?
It's my understanding that the insurance companies will open up and accept bids or accept requests for bids 60 days prior to the close of your year.
Okay.
They'll review the current year's activity. We'd want to give, if there's a new broker coming in, time for them to familiarize themselves with the city's activities, to give them the opportunity to determine the needs. So it would just be whatever time the brokers are comfortable with.
And how long does the RFP process itself take?
I think that we were currently planning on closing this one early in September, midway through September.
So theoretically, then 2 months?
That was our
From
outline.
when you put it out to when you get the proposals back?
That's around the timeline that we set for this proposal.
So if I do the math correctly, 2 months prior to the end of the year is November 1st, and 2 months, not that it's in this particular order, October 1st, September 1st, to have them respond to familiarize themselves with our needs and respond. I insist, and I will put on the agenda regardless of what the mayor is, and because council has authorized me to set the agenda, it will be on the agenda on August 30th.
The RF, if I can interject.
Does it require a council resolution to send out the RFP?
No, the
okay.
RFP is out.
Oh, it
The
is
RFP
out.
is- yeah.
But what was paused by the mayor?
There was a meeting to go over the RFP that was sent out. It was an initial discussion so all the brokers could familiarize themselves with our process.
Okay, so what didn't happen then, I misunderstood, but what didn't happen was that the brokers got all of the information they needed to be able to respond to the RFP.
They got the RFP, which outlined the process that we were planning to go through.
And so what you're saying is for them to be able to effectively respond in time, they need that information by September 1st.
In the RFP, there's still a question and answer period where questions are requested or required to be submitted by a date in August. I'm not familiar off the top of my head.
I want to say it was the 23rd, but I'm not
It
quite
was
certain.
later in the month.
Okay.
There would be a 1 week or 1.5 weeks turnaround time to respond to all the brokers with the questions that were asked related to the RFP, then giving them a week to 2 weeks to adjust their responses for the answers that were provided.
So for them to be able to effectively ask good questions, they need to have that meeting. Is that more or less right?
The meeting would have been a one-on-one to discuss. The question and answer, I think, is the better approach because everyone's providing a written question. There'll be written responses provided to all parties interested in submitting a proposal.
And if we get written questions, are we prepared, or is there any reason to expect the mayor to delay our timely answering of those questions?
I can't speak for the mayor.
Of course you can, and that was an unfair question. But are we prepared to provide the answers timely? Do we have the information we need to be able to answer the questions in a timely fashion?
When setting up the timeline, we felt we gave ourselves ample time to respond to the questions that were submitted.
When I'm done here, Ms. Mealy may have other questions or other comments about this. And the reason I'm being tough on this one is 2 years ago, council asked for this process to occur, right? It didn't occur 2 years ago. We ran out of time, maybe legitimately, just because we didn't know how much time necessarily it would take, and it probably didn't start the process until this time in the year. I don't remember exactly the month. Last year, it didn't happen, and I think largely because the mayor drug his feet on the issue. This year, I expect it to happen, and we have a process started, and we have time to be able to make it happen. It's taken 8 months to get there, when we could have done this in March or April or May, and taken a little bit more leisurely time to get it done. We still have time. I expect proposals from brokers and the ability to review those proposals and choose the best broker, which to me means the best service at the lowest price. Combination of those two things that then they can shop whoever the chosen broker is can shop our insurance around to, again, get the best service at the lowest price. We've waited too long for that process, and I don't want any feet dragging to stop it from happening this year. You only get one shot per year. So that's my comments for the evening. Other comments from members of council? Ms. Mealy.
So just to clarify the process, and Joe, if I make a mistake, please correct me. What happens is we've been working for several months with the insurance consultant on putting out an RFP. We had an initial meeting with any interested brokers through the finance committee, under the aegis of the finance committee, a special meeting, to ask the brokers what concerns they had, to basically present them with our basic plan and ask if they had concerns or suggestions. We incorporated those into the final document. Ms. Nagy drafted the final document. It was approved. It was my understanding by the mayor's office. Obviously, council doesn't have a role in it at this stage. So it was approved by the mayor's office, by the finance department. We eventually advertised set dates for various and sundry elements of releasing the RFP, followed by a meeting to discuss the contents of the RFP with interested brokers, followed by a question and answer period. Final answers are due, I think, around the 1st of September, but I might be wrong, to the brokers' questions. The responses to the RFP are due on the 16th of September. That gives us about a month, a little more than a month, to review those responses and choose a broker, and then for that broker to go out and shop for rates for us.
So let me clarify on a couple things.
And some of this might need to go back to Joe, so
Yeah,
sorry.
so what you're saying is the mayor's canceling, it wasn't a rescheduling. The canceling of the meeting was after the RFP was already sent out.
Right.
And after, theoretically, he had approved the language.
Right.
He brought up a concern about wanting to add language.
Right.
That doesn't make
After,
sense to
right,
me.
I mean, which was why I referred to it in the email I copied everyone on as unprofessional. Because if you have a concern about the language in an RFP, you voice that concern, you correct the issue before you release the RFP, not after the RFP's been released. You know, we've been talking about it, as you said. Council's been asking about it for 2 years. We issued an RFP last year that was too late to be effective. We've issued one this year in a timely fashion such that it can be effective. So clearly there has been, say, a 2-year period to think about what we want to see in that RFP, and at least a month-long period to review the proposed content for the RFP and comment if whether, you know, and so to wait until it's released and have a problem with it, I guess would seem to indicate either that one hadn't taken the proper time to review it beforehand, or perhaps that one was listening to somebody who hadn't had a chance to review it before it was made public. That is to say that there were concerns voiced by someone in the community, and that the mayor is responding to those, not to his own internal concerns about the content of the RFP. It would be hard for me to say. But my larger point, I guess, is that the September 16th deadline for the brokers means that the city needs to be upfront with answering questions about and ideally we would have a sit down so that, because sometimes the best way to review people's questions is en masse, and then they can go back, and if they have smaller questions, we can answer those piecemeal. But we need to give ourselves ample time then to review the proposals, and then obviously in the end we'll need to send it out to the insurance companies, get pricing, and right. The other very important element that we've discussed a number of times, but I have not heard one way or the other from the administration, is that I personally feel that it's exceptionally important to have a member of the finance committee sitting on the broker selection committee. But I've mentioned that multiple times and have not heard any movement from the mayor. But it seems to me that because obviously in the final analysis we would like the concurrence of council on the selection of brokers. And on the, you know, we want to feel that the process is above board and transparent. We want to feel that the city is not making any sort of deals to accommodate anyone. And so we want as many eyes on the process as possible all the way through. And to my way of thinking, to make that a reality, we need to have officials from both sides of government involved in the selection process, so that there is faith on the part of council and on the part of the public that we have been above board with our selection.
A couple thoughts based on what Ms. Mealy said. First, Joe, thank you for answering the questions. I know that this has not been something that it has been your exclusive responsibility for shepherding it through and making sure all this happens, and you just happen to be the one closest to the issue that happens to be here tonight. So thanks. I appreciate the answers that you gave. Second, could you pass along to those others that on the 30th we will be asking about questions received and our progress in answering those questions, given the pending timeframe that the two of you just outlined. And three, could you pass along to the powers that be the request that we have a member on the broker selection committee, and in the end, if that one is rejected, my subsequent requirement will be that we get all of the proposals that are submitted in a timely fashion, so that when the administration makes a recommendation, we can do our own review of all of the proposals as a means to be well informed enough to decide whether or not the administration's recommendation is one we concur with. And I see that you're taking plenty of notes, so I appreciate that as well. Other comments from members of council? Mr. Allison.
I just have one question. Joe, do you happen to know how many RFPs were sent out?
I believe there were 10 to 15 individuals it was sent to.
Okay.
As for individual firms, I don't know. I know that there were multiple individuals at different agencies. So I don't know how many specific agencies, but about 10 to 15 individuals.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Katz?
I'm going to change tracks here.
Absolutely.
Okay. There's going to be a public meeting Tuesday, August 7th at 6:30 p.m. at the Lions Fair Building in Newberry for the public to voice their opinion on what they feel should be done or what shouldn't be done in Phil Preziosi's park.
Thank you very much. Other comments from members of council? Seeing none, comments from the administration? Mr. Jordan? No?
There is not a meeting on Monday,
On August 6th, that meeting will not happen. Okay, thank you for correcting the record. Other comments from the administration? Seeing none, comments from the general public? Ms. Fioretti, please come to the podium, state your name and address as we've done before, and welcome.
Joe Fioretti, 37 Elver Street, Williamsport, PA. Thank you, Council President and ladies and gentlemen of the council. I'd like to thank the mayor, but unfortunately he's not here tonight again. Maybe he didn't get the memo. But a couple of things I want to talk about, we talked about tonight, or you guys talked about. One thing, the levee, Gravis Run, thank God it's happening. I'm sure a lot of the property owners are saying the same thing. You know, I hate to say it, but what took so long? Now, I also heard that once Gravis Run is done, it's going to be our baby. We own it. That means in the budget, we got to keep putting money in there for the upkeep of it. Look at the levee. Here we are. We might as well stick our fingers in the levee or whatever to hold it together. I'm really worried about that. Another thing I read in the paper is Mayor Campana talking about the city being in financial distress and possibly trying to keep us away from Act 147. I've done some reading on Act 147, and I'm pretty sure that's one thing we don't want here. Harrisburg is going through it right now. If you read what's going on down there, it's supposed to be a 5-year process. You're supposed to get back up on your own feet and take off again. Harrisburg's in it for 7 years right now, and they're asking to get out of it, but they want to keep their tax rates going the way it is of the 147. If they don't, they're going to lose $12 million, which means they got to raise property taxes. And from what I read, they're talking for the next 2 years with a 20% property tax rate. And I think they said by 2021, another 43% property tax rate. We can't afford that. So hopefully, between the mayor and city council, since you're elected officials for the city, you're basically I mean, you run the city for us, things can maybe start getting a little bit smoother. I don't see it happening right now. I don't know what we need to do for mediation or whatever, and I'm not picking on sides to say it's one or the other, but this is terrible for our city. This is what I want to say is, I guess, as a resident and taxpayer here. I just hope things can get better in the future here. Again, I wish the mayor was here tonight. Unfortunately, he's not, but one more thing before I leave, and I wanted to bring something up. I did have a meeting with him about 2 or 3 weeks ago in his office, might have been 3 weeks ago, and I went over a few things I wanted to talk to him about. One of them was Mr. Capelli, who's on the Williamsport Water Authority now, on the board there. When Mr. Capelli left here, I don't want to get into details, but he owes the city some money here, probably about $5,000 for legal fees, that he said he would pay back. I'm taking the man for his word. He never paid the money back. When he went on to become a state representative, I read later in the paper where he said he never stated that. He was hired back here for our water authority now, and he's working. And what I'd like to point out is if I don't pay my water bill, they shut it off. And they're not going to turn it back on until I pay my water bill. But how ironic is it that Mr. Capelli is sitting on the water board over here? You know, I don't think he should be here. You know, he's not a man of his word. He never paid the money back, and why he's employed here is beyond me. Well, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Other comments from the general public? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Aye.